Hello, my name is Omar Regalado. Welcome to the Holy Human Project. In this video, I will be explaining a little bit how to map or make sense of your invisible layers. In the previous videos, I've been sharing roughly what the Holy Human Project is about. In general, it is about bringing together 4 core layers that make up your life, and those are your personal story, your psychology, your soul, and your mission. Usually we are bombarded with different inputs, knowledge, and we have all kinds of resources and tools and books and so many available knowledge about these topics, and we consume them. They are sometimes very helpful, they are sometimes just entertaining, but often enough they can be conflicting, and we may or may not end up confused about them, and we just basically kind of keep each separate. And so we do have an understanding, for example, of our life, and how for example, certain events shaped us, and somehow they marked us in certain ways. And then we have an understanding of our psychology. Maybe we have done therapy, maybe we have not, but we somehow have an idea of how our minds and our emotions work. And then of course we are in a way related to spirituality, what our soul may be, or what it may not be. And maybe religion is part of our life, maybe it was part of our lives, maybe we do have some sort of spiritual practice or a spiritual system or inclination. But overall, we cannot really bring them all together in a way that feels coherent, and we end up fragmenting them. And then to mention all 4 layers, then we have, or you may have your mission, that often enough is this just question mark, like, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? What is this all about? What is everything that I've gone through for, right? So overall, despite the abundance of information and resources and influencers and authors, we don't really have developed ways in which we can bring them together, in which we can understand integration. So the Holy Human Project is about that. In my previous video, I talked about the ecology of the invisible, and the logic of that is that instead of thinking of these layers as separate departments, which in many ways they are separate, but they are connected as well. So just like a forest that has the trees, it has different sets of animals, it has all these dynamics and flows and feedback loops happening. It is just like that within ourselves and across these 4 layers. So that's what I call the ecology of the invisible. And in this video, I would like to share briefly how to start mapping all of these layers. But instead of just like going right into the mapping, because we will be covering each layer in the coming videos and how to bring them together, today's video is basically about you starting to somehow know the difference and start noticing these 4 layers for what they are. And so let's start with your personal story. So this is everything that has happened to you, is everything that is objective. You can see it with you could have seen it with your eyes at any point in your life. Some other people also probably were there with you, and you know this, what happened, where you lived, where you were born, your height, all these details, elements, experiences that happened to you. Other people can confirm them, basically. These include all the events, all the education you got, and all of those are basically inputs, right? And then those inputs, basically like this timeline, this database of records from your life, make up your story. This story informs different elements of who we think we are, and this creates some sense of identity, what some traditions or schools of thought call the ego. And that's basically this whole layer about your personal story. And that's in a way very obvious. This is something that you need not study or do anything to somehow relate and understand this layer, even though it has a number of invisible elements. Most notably, your memories and different interpretations about it, but this is for the most part objective, right? Then we go into your psychology. Your psychology is how so much of that story shaped how you think and how you feel. For the most part, psychology is where your mind and your emotions meet. It's how you relate to your emotions, how you think, how you go into these loops. Maybe, for example, sometimes you worry too much and you go into what some people call spiraling, or maybe you are a very positive thinker and you can kind of, have this positive mindset and just get out of any dark place when your mind goes there. And there are different ways in which you can approach your psychology. This is probably very connected to real time, what I just mentioned on the examples with the mindset or with spiraling. But overall, we also have like chronic states. We have different elements that have shaped us. And for example, we develop different coping mechanisms to deal with certain situations. The way we grew up and how our human needs were met or not, that allowed us to develop different qualities in our character, in our ways of thinking, and all of that shapes how we think and how we feel, and that overlap between mind and emotions. It's connected to a number of inputs as well, but for the most part, it allows you to relate with others, with situations, and with topics in general, which of course is very connected with your story. But you can see just by looking at these two initial layers that they are different, and not having a clear way on how to go about each is what usually confuses us. And then we end up basically working in one of them at a time, but then we don't really know how to integrate them, and we end up just basically living fragmented lives. We use personal development for a lot of things connected to our story. We go to therapy for things related to our psychology, but usually there's not a match between them, and then there's no sense of integration. Now let's go to the third layer, your soul or your spirituality. This is likely the most confusing because we no longer can really rely on religion or organized religion to really guide us with what this is about. In many ways, this can be connected to your faith. It can be connected to mindfulness practice and all the transcendental elements that you may or may not believe in. Maybe you're an atheist, but overall, your soul, or this layer of your invisible ecology, is what is always present, is immanent, it is transcendent, and it's accessible to all of us. It is what brings qualities that are universal, such as joy, such as awe, inspiration, so many elements that we have naturally when we are children come and are part of this layer, which is not exactly the same as positive psychology or positive emotions. They overlap, they coincide, but overall your soul, it's a source of wisdom, is something that we can always draw upon, that we can connect with, and in general is something that can drive so many aspects of our lives, but we can also choose to completely ignore it, and then we can be living and ruling our lives and our behavior completely devoid of any input from our soul. So in many ways this is a choice that you have, but it is distinct from your story and very distinct from your psychology, even though many times your psychology is either blocking or preventing you to reach your soul. So once you have removed or understood these elements that block your access to your soul, so to speak, then you can start connecting with it in different ways. But there's a whole depth to this layer, which we likely have lost how to integrate in our lives, at least in modern life. And this is something that has greatly impacted my life, but this is something that took me a long time to understand and bring together, especially out of religion and out of all these traditions that have somehow been the gatekeepers of this. And I now believe that this is not something that any religion or any tradition should really kind of own. This is something that is accessible to anyone, and I will be sharing more of that. But the idea for this video about this layer is that it is different from your psychology. That's probably the main takeaway from that. And finally, your mission. Your mission is basically this aggregation of elements from your story, the way you have learned to behave, your psychology, then how your soul may be inspiring you or driving you in many ways to contribute to the world, basically to support life and you somehow finding your place in it. And this is where many elements that are shaped by your story and definitely get also informed by your psychology, such as your values, temperament, character, and other elements, in a way kind of create this structure for you to live certain mission. So obviously these are all arbitrary labels and categories, but this is how we make sense of the world, just the way science or different frameworks or domains work. We need to somehow draw the lines, and this is what this video is about. It's about mapping. And so in order for us to be able to draw a map within that invisible psychology that I shared with you in the previous video, now we have to start finding ways in which to map these 4 core layers. So sure, values or different elements of your personality may be relevant both for your mission and your psychology and maybe even your story, but that doesn't mean that overlap or that redundancy makes it impossible to map them independently. So that's how to go about this. But once you start framing your life across these 4 layers, your story, your psychology, your soul or your spirit or spirituality, and your mission, then you can start somehow making progress in each, understand things that happen in your past and how to bring them together, and then you can only then start really bring them together in a coherent way. If you don't somehow map them in a way that makes sense for you, you don't have to do it the way I'm presenting it right now. You can find any other ways. There are definitely other integrative approaches, but this is one. And so before you find a way of integrating them, you will be fragmented, and maybe you will be performing in your career, maybe trying to compensate for events from your past or your story. Maybe you will be neglecting your psychology, or maybe your psychology will be spilling over your mission and will be blocking some efforts that you had made in order to live your mission. Or maybe your soul is sometimes very, very active and present, or sometimes it's just not at all there because you don't really have the tools or the knowledge on how to bring it together with the rest of the layers. So that's what this video was about, how to start separating these 4 layers in a way that makes sense, in a way that you can learn to tell the difference between each and not bring them together into this all bundle of emotions, psychology, thoughts, beliefs that we know about, but we don't really know how to go about it, right? So we need to first, kind of make sense of each before we can bring them together again and create this sense of integration, which is what I will be sharing in the coming videos. So that's what I have for you today, how to start mapping that ecology of the invisible. And that starts with naming and observing those 4 core layers. You maybe can start taking some notes, observing certain elements or patterns that you've already probably acknowledged from these 4 layers from your past or your lives. Maybe you've done tests, maybe you've had therapy, maybe you've read certain books, or maybe you just have had certain epiphanies or realizations about different events in your life. Once you start creating these containers, then you can connect the dots, and then you can start finding what it all means and how you can leverage from all of that to create the life you actually want. and leave behind things that don't really serve you anymore. So that's what I have for you today. I hope that you can probably start mapping your 4 core layers, and I will be sharing more about each of the layers and more about the mapping itself in coming videos. So talk to you then, and don't forget to comment or reach out if you're finding any of this content valuable. And as usual, feel free to check my content on Substack, like or subscribe if you think this is something that is resonating with you, and I'll be more than happy to connect or answer any questions that you may have. So talk to you soon. Bye bye.